To some people, the city of Chicago is railroading in America. Tracks lead in and out of every corner of the city, and freight yards dot its suburbs. 50 miles northwest of Chicago, much of the city's transportation past is preserved at the Illinois Railway Museum. Its volunteers salvage and restore anything from subway and trolley cars to diesel switchers. But when the public visits, people always want to ride the steam train.
I've always loved trains. I grew up alongside the Wabash Railroad in Springfield, Illinois. And there's a basic honesty about the machines. They are built for a specific purpose. They do that purpose extremely well. My real-world job, I'm a trial attorney in Chicago, but at least one day a weekend, sometimes two, I come out here. This is my mental therapy. Out here, it's just working on the railroad.
The museum holds over 350 historical pieces of equipment, housed in over a dozen sheds and barns. They'd like to be able to restore every single piece.
Restoring and operating the equipment is all volunteer work. The effort that would go into restoring just a simple passenger car might be 10 or 15 years of work. A steam locomotive might take a decade or more to rebuild from the ground up. The work that goes into rebuilding or even just maintaining an operating steam locomotive or an operating streetcar is dirty, filthy, terribly hard physically, sometimes terribly depressing because you build something and fix it and the part right next to it breaks. And that happens fairly often. And you get a little disgusted at times. But eventually, after many years, you have a piece of machinery that's living history, something that your parents or grandparents or great-grandparents may have ridden on, is back live again, back on the rails, with new generations of people coming out to see it.
The largest working steam locomotive at the museum is a 210 dating back to 1918. Locomotives that got much bigger began facing certain operating problems. In 1889, Frenchman Anatole Mallet devised a solution to a growing problem. Locomotives couldn't easily steer around curves in the track beyond a certain length. Rather than powering 5 or 6 pair of driving wheels attached to the same frame with 1 pair of cylinders, Mallet hinged the frame and created a flexible locomotive. He built the boiler and 1 set of driving wheels on the back. He then installed a 2nd set of cylinders and driving wheels on the independent front frame, allowing the whole locomotive to bend through a curve. What he had was 2 engines under 1 boiler. Mallet, or articulated locomotives, came in 2 varieties. Simple articulated meant that the boiler supplied steam to 2 sets of equal-sized cylinders. Compound articulateds had larger-sized cylinders in the front and small ones in back. The compound design allowed hot steam straight from the boiler to power the regular-sized rear cylinders. The steam expelled from these would then be sent to the larger front cylinders. Their extra size compensated for the reduced pressure of the second-hand steam they utilized. Recycling the system had its benefits, but other drawbacks to the compound cylinder system limited the locomotive's success. But simple articulateds like the 2666 Alleghenies and 4884 Big Boys enjoyed productive careers hauling millions of tons of freight for up to 20 years. Still another way locomotive builders tried to squeeze every ounce of power out of conventional steam was by adding 3rd cylinders between the locomotive's driving wheels. Maintaining the inside cylinder was a nightmare, so their popularity with the railroads never soared. Early steam development was fueled by the simple desire to build a bigger beast. But with increasing competition from cost and labor-efficient diesels in the 40s and 50s, steam evolution became a fight for steam survival. Perhaps the most unusual steam locomotives that ever evolved were the steam turbines. Turbine-driven pistonless units that either generated electricity to run traction motors or were directly geared to the wheels themselves. In 1938, General Electric built 2 steam turbine electrics attempting to compete with Electromotive Corporation's diesel electrics. They were scrapped within 5 years. The Pennsylvania Railroad experimented with a direct drive steam turbine in the 40s, and in 1947, the Chesapeake and Ohio Railroad acquired 3 steam turbine electrics. Their turbines were rated at 6,000 horsepower, and they were billed as the world's largest single-unit passenger locomotives. But continual breakdowns did them in. They too were scrapped in 1950. The final steam turbine of note belonged to steam railroading's last major line, the Norfolk and Western. Number 2300, the John Henry, weighed over 800,000 pounds. It was built in 1954. Though it was successful, it was too big and came too late, and like all of its turbine predecessors, was scrapped in just a few years. Steam turbines worked well in clean, stable environments like boats and power plants, but they couldn't hold up to the dirt, dust, and physical pounding railroad locomotives faced day after day. The growing benefits of diesel locomotives were rapidly closing the curtain on the steam era. Diesel's brightly painted colors were practically synonymous with the bright future they promised the rails. People tended to think of steam engines as black and sooty, but some were colorful and quite stunning. The Southern Railway's crescents were green and gorgeous. Santa Fe's Blue Goose was sky blue. And Southern Pacific's classy Daylights were called the most beautiful trains in the world. They ran from San Francisco to Southern California. Maybe that's why they were sunny orange. Not every steam engine was black, and even the ones that were remained majestically handsome until the railroads dropped their fire for the last time.
My grandfather used to fire part-time on the Cotton Belt Railroad. Today, I fire. One of my best friends in far southern Illinois was a fireman on the Illinois Central. In fact, he fired the last live steam locomotive on the Illinois Central. When I last saw him several years ago, he's now well into his 80s. He handed me his fireman's scoop that he used on that last run and said, this should go from one fireman to another. We're keeping that alive. And that's part of the charm. That's what draws me to this.
I'm Roger Teeter.